I have got Yes, thank you for recording this meeting. But I'm so excited to talk about this with y'all because often I get to share about disability work either in the corporate world for a company's, diversity and inclusion week that they do once a year, or in the theater industry, which is where I got very fired up and interested in this work in the first place. So a lot of arts work and a lot of corporate work, but this is my first time yet to lead a workshop for a church, and I'm very, very grateful. I am going to share my screen really quick, but just a little bit about me. And I also want to give you a quick visual description. Why are we doing visual descriptions? Because on a Zoom call, if you're in my world, I'm legally blind. So y'all might see a bunch of Brady Bunch squares, but I just see a bunch of blobs, right? So like, I don't know what y'all look like right now. So awesome. If you just come in from working out or something. But I will say, when I give a visual description, I'm a white woman in my late 20s with dirty blonde hair. I'm wearing a little shirt with stars on it, and I'm sitting in my kitchen, and there's a really funky painting with bright colors and a face behind me. So that's just my little visual description. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get started. Now, tonight is going to cover a lot of ground, and if you just take one nugget from tonight and start implementing it, that's awesome. Like, that is so good because it's going to take a lot of people implementing those one little things for this conversation to really get off the ground. So I'm going to share my screen here with you and pull up my slides. Everyone in these slides are friends of mine or folks that I've worked with. So I promise you I didn't. They all gave me permission to use these slides. But I'm also going to describe these slides to you just to get in the habit of that. So in this slide, you see a Black woman in a power chair who is wearing a fierce jumpsuit situation with some white sunglasses. She's actually a disabled model named Lolo Jones. So here's a little overview of tonight. We're going to have a little introduction, what we just did, visual description. And whenever we're in a Zoom meeting, if we were about to break out, and this was a little smaller, there's a lot of us in here, so we're not going to go through a big access check. But one thing to think about is when you're sharing your name and your pronouns in an introduction, to also say, hey, if you have any access needs, this is a time you can let us know, right? So that's what an access check is. And then before we get started with all of the below points, I really want to acknowledge that there have been so many people who have worked tirelessly for so many years to just give disability a seat at the table. And I have to acknowledge all of those people. I had the chance to work a lot in New York when I was living there for 5 years in the disability inclusion space, both at the mayor's office and in the Broadway and film and TV world. And we would not be able to get in the door without some of these folks who've been working tirelessly since really the 60s to get disability inclusion to where it is today, which still has a long way to go. So you just want the comfort of knowing what's coming next. Take a look at this slide, but I'm going to jump right in. So why should we have this conversation, right? Why are these trainings so important? These guys here in this picture, they're some of my friends that I do hip hop dance with at the Exceptional Foundation. So they want to know why too. People with disabilities make up 1/4 of our population. So 1 in 4 people is disabled. Disability is intersectional. Disability doesn't care your race, how much money you have, who you love, right? Disability is the only club anyone can join at any time. We could all become disabled. And it's important to know what's up and what your rights are and what you deserve and what accommodations you can have. Also, because frankly, disability isn't a bad word. We're going to have a whole section on language, so don't worry. But it's time to do some unlearning so that we can actually talk about disability, right? We can say the word disability and not think that it is negative, right? It doesn't have the negative connotation that maybe we imagine that it does. So when we're talking about disability, society has seen it through 2 different lenses. You may have to move your little screen or your cursor along so you can see both of these. And I know it's small print, so I can't even read them. So I will describe them for you in pretty basic terms. There's the medical model of disability. Our world has operated in this model for a long time, and actually a lot of hospitals still do, and a lot of countries still do, and a lot of educators still do. The medical model is this idea that the person with the disability is a problem and we have to fix them. The person with the disability can't do anything on their own. They have to lean on others all the time. They don't want independence, right? They want to be cared for. It's an assuming kind of model. And honestly, it still happens today. These kinds of medical model assumptions. It is about society in the world trying to hide or change the person with a disability. And that's a bummer because they're pretty awesome. And then we could look at disability through the social model. The social model looks to the individual with the disability, saying that this individual is in charge, right? This individual can make decisions and choices and has agency. It's both of these models are a lot about that agency, right? And the social model of disability tells us, it says, hey, the person with the disability isn't the problem. The real problem is society, and that a society was built without people with disabilities in mind. Think about, I saw this every single day living in New York City, right? It's a city full of old historic buildings, and very few of those buildings could get renovated. Very few of those buildings were accessible to some of my friends in the disability community who were wheelchair users. The social model, though, seeks to empower the disabled person to choose, and we're going to operate out of that model today. Now, if any of you in here have been in any disability history classes, there are many other models in between, but we're just going to dip our toe in. So I'm going to ask us in this next 10 minutes to go into a breakout room. So Stephanie or Katie or someone's going to help me send us out. But I want y'all to have a little chat with your friends, with whoever you're assigned with, on who or what has shaped your view on disability. Have you seen it more through a medical model or a social model? And again, no shame, like we're all here to learn. And have you ever challenged these views, or did you just say, okay, that's how it is? I just want to know really what drew you to come tonight also, and who shaped your view on disability. So I'm going to put about 10 minutes on the clock, and at 6:24, we are going to come back. So see if we can get enough time for folks to share. And let me know, Stephanie or Katie, if we can make some breakouts happen.
Stephanie, you want to do it or you want me to?
I can't do it. I made you the host.
Oh, I will do it. All right, hold on one second.
And thank goodness, y'all, because while I can enlarge a lot of things, sometimes Zoom doesn't enlarge everything. So
hey, Allie B, how many people ideally in a room?
like 4 or 5.
Okay. I think we're getting ready to go.
Great.
Do you see an invite on your screen, Ben? I can't figure out how to send it to you again. Let's see, I could move you to a different room. Okay. They're all in breakout rooms right now. You want me to take this bed and do it back there? Okay. She's not gonna want to sleep back here. Sorry for anyone watching this recorded. I'm pretty sure you're hearing Bluey on my TV, but it won't let me mute. You okay, Em?
Nice. Hi, Katie.
Hey,
you?
y'all.
We're fast. I was like, oh gosh, did we lose Barbara? And then
No one left behind.
I hope y'all don't mind. I'm enjoying a glass of wine.
Okay, every time I sit here, this is the best spot at my table, but I have my little like bar. Every time I get on Zoom, I just slightly turn it this way.
Yeah.
Not because of-
Laura, I had a glass of wine with my hair. I just got from the hair appointment. So it's been one of those days where I was like, yes, I would actually like the wine
Yes.
during the hair appointment, please. And thank you.
It looks great.
Well, I forewent the blow dry so that I could make it on time. So it's wet, but the color is exactly what I was looking for. So we're good.
Love that.
Also, I'm just realizing that we're recording. So this entire conversation is there for
I totally.
posterity.
While y'all were gone, it won't let you, when you're the host, it won't let you stop recording. And Emery's in here watching Bluey. So I
Nice.
made a little note to whoever watches this recording. I was like, I'm very sorry because you're hearing a Bluey episode. So
Hey,
all kinds of entertainment.
yeah, just a little spicy.
hey, real quick, while it's just us, Laura had mentioned that she wanted to catch the LGBTQ training, and I know we recorded that. Do you happen to know off the top of your head where that is?
That's a great question.
I think we sent a link around after.
I think we did too, because Magic City would have done the recording.
That's right. I'll dig for it, Laura. I'll get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Leah would like to say hi. Your people.
Hey. All right, I'm about to bring everybody back. I gave him a 2-minute warning. Oh, they get 60 seconds. Okay. She said 6:24. I am very prompt.
Lear kicked us out of our breakout room. He doesn't know
I
how
mean,
to use Zoom.
I kicked you out, sort of.
No, it was. We weren't quite done. We were in the middle of. A
Oh, sorry.
conversation.
You got 60 seconds, but
Yeah.
close enough.
Look, how to come down here. I see you're sitting with your baby.
Yes, we're dividing and conquering tonight. Harp's not feeling well, so
Oh,
I know.
I hate to say it, but like so many people at my school have COVID right now. It's really scary.
Well, it's not COVID because she was with her cousin on Sunday who had a bug. So cool.
But it's
Okay,
Well,
I think
are
we're
we
back,
back?
Allie B.
Okay, awesome. I don't know about y'all, but we had some rich little nuggets of discussion. I want you, if you had something that really stuck out to you in that session, please write it down. Take the time, and we are going to circle back at the end. But I want to keep on moving on because we got a lot of ground to cover. So know that we might share at the end. We will share, don't worry. But hold those things in your hearts and see how you feel about them even as we progress through the training. So this is the part that's not as much sparkly and exciting, but we will talk about some legal things. So the ADA just turned 31. What's wild is the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So any kind of legislation around disability is of this degree is pretty big. And I know Stephanie's talked to y'all about how the ADA does not apply to churches. There's like a clause there, but it, provides and makes sure that individuals with disabilities can hopefully acquire jobs and go to school with their peers and have public transportation and equal access to these things, right? There are a lot of sections of the ADA, or 5 titles, that each kind of deal with a different part of public life. And if you really want to talk and get into the nitty gritty of the ADA, let's go have coffee because we can. But I don't want to bore y'all too much. The one that I wish would apply to churches and places of worship is Title II, which prohibits public places from discriminating against people with disabilities. But alas, we have the exemption in places of worship. What's interesting in a lot of the work that I found myself doing in arts organizations is businesses and leaders and organizations would say, oh, well, our space is ADA accessible, right? We have accommodations. We have, the accessible placards, or we have accessible parking. So we did it. Yay. And that's where the issue and sort of the rub is. We have to look at the ADA, this law that was created and signed in 1990 as a springboard, not that we've done it, right? The ADA just says, you know what, it's time, but like we have to continue doing the work because a lot of places, while they might, and I think about this a lot in the wake of our world, there's so many places that are claiming to be accessible and inclusive, or even like have access and inclusion statements. And then when you ask about certain accommodations, they're just not there. So we can't think of the ADA as just being a checkbox. And that's what I really want us to think about a lot. Now, this next part of the evening might feel a little new or a little uncomfortable or a little like, oh, but I've always said this thing. Like, why do I have to say this thing? And that's okay. I just want to plant some seeds tonight about language and disability. It is evolving constantly. So note that, like, for example, I am legally blind and have low vision. Well, my whole childhood, I said, I'm visually impaired and I have a vision impairment, and that's just the language that was used. But now we all say low vision. So it's just one of those little things that language changes over time, and some people change with it and some people say what they've always said, but I think it's important to know sort of where we're going in the language department. Also in this picture, this picture was taken in the Bronx after a vocal concert of Broadway songs, and the singer in the middle is an incredible singer named Mustafa. So there you go. This is at a school for the blind in the Bronx, New York. Now, before we get really nitty gritty into language, I do want to acknowledge that it's okay if there's fear in saying the wrong thing, right? And like, we have to acknowledge that we don't want to mess up and we're human. And so I just want to acknowledge that, especially if you're about to hear terms. There's one in particular that I get a lot of pushback around, and like, it's okay. It is totally fine. In this slide, you'll see this photo of Judy Heumann, who fought for not only the ADA, but the 504 laws as well. So she is one of my accessibility heroes, and you can read her memoir or listen to it. But language about disability, for the most part, was actually coined by non-disabled people. And so it's time now that we listen to see how disabled people talk about themselves. We've talked about how it's fluid, that it changes over time. We've talked about how terminology is really, really important. But what's important more than that is our attitudes toward disabled people. In the disability community, you'll hear this idea of person first language and identity first language. And some folks will say there's a right and a wrong way to talk about disability. I'm not in that camp, but I will give you an example. So person first language would be, I am a person with a disability. I am a person who's deaf. I am a person who's blind. I am a person who uses a wheelchair. Identity first language would be, I am a blind performer. I am an amputee who plays basketball, right? So identity first puts the identity before anything else that would come after it. A lot of folks say, is there a right one to use? Like, what's right, Allie B? I want to do the right thing. And I always say, if you are not in the presence of, your friend who's disabled or disabled friend or whatever, person first is a safe way to go. But what's really important is that you listen to how your disabled friend talks about disability. And even you can ask them, if there's someone who is talking about it, say, hey, how do you talk about your disability? And like, how do I talk about it? And that's if you have that open relationship. That's not the thing that you want to like ask in the middle of the supermarket to a stranger, perhaps. But if it's someone in your circle, listen to how they talk about themselves. And again, person first if you're not sure. There's some examples here, and this is again really tiny font, but there are some examples of language that has been coined over time and some do's and don'ts. We're going to start with the first one, which is wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. Typically now we just would call someone who uses a wheelchair, right? A wheelchair user. They are not bound to their chairs. They go to bed, they use the restroom, they, get in the shower. Like their wheelchair is a part of them, but they are not confined to it. The next thing that I want to talk about is when we say that someone suffers from a disability. This makes assumptions about how the disabled person feels about their disability before we even ask them, right? And we don't want to assume. Another idea is, or another language swap we could say is when we say, oh, the disabled, the blind, the deaf, right? We want to use it as an adjective rather than a noun. Now, the fourth one, it makes me cringe, but a lot of folks still use the R word. And I'm going to say it out loud because it just doesn't feel good and we got to get it out. But a lot of people still say, oh, that person is mentally retarded. And it is just not all right. Instead, we could say, my friend who has an intellectual disability, a cognitive disability, a developmental disability. We want to go in that route. Number 5 might come a little shocking, and that's okay. A lot of times when we talk about folks who are wheelchair users, we'll say that they're handicapped, or we got hurt in an accident, we'll say, I was handicapped. Which again is a word that's been used for a long time. But if you are talking about a person with a disability, you can straight up say, when I had this disability or when I was temporarily disabled. Or if you're talking about, for example, a handicapped, right? We've always called it handicap parking. I mean, growing up, that's all we used on the handicap bathroom. But instead, hey, are there any accessible parking spots? Is there an accessible bathroom? Is just a different reframe that we can try to use just so that we're not, going ahead and throwing out a label, because a lot of times someone who's a wheelchair user, that's all you've ever known. You probably don't feel super handicapped. I mean, a lot of folks that in my world are like, I don't really feel, this is really all I got. Like, I don't know anything else. So we don't have to say it's a handicap because this is just me. Again, if we talk about someone who is a little person, some folks still use the word midget or dwarf. Now, you could say a person has dwarfism, but calling someone a dwarf is not the most helpful. We've talked about some already, but some folks still say deaf and dumb or hearing impaired. And just like I talked to y'all about visually impaired, now we just say hard of hearing, deaf and hard of hearing. And just for a little bonus point, if someone was born deaf, when we write about that person, or if we're talking about them or typing anything up, we would use a capital D, right? And then if they're little d deaf, they might still have some hearing or partial hearing. And then they would talk about their deafness with a lowercase d. Last, or we have 3 more, just kidding. I rushed to the end, but number 8 talks about using the words physically challenged or differently abled. I hear differently abled a lot. And again, not bad. But when we say differently abled, and if we look at the history of that, that is a word that was coined by a non-disabled person. And it supports this idea of difference, and like they are just so differently abled, like us and them. And if I can share anything with you, and I know I shared this in the church video, but say the word disability is not a bad word, and it doesn't have to be limiting. What's limiting is the way that society has viewed disability for so many years. Second to last, we hear this in every movie in the movie theater and podcasts and books, right? Oh, she overcame her disability, or she was just so inspiring because she went to the store and got her groceries and she was in a wheelchair. Like, isn't that inspirational? And y'all might be laughing or thinking, what? But we do it all the time, right? This is a term when people sort of sensationalize or inspiration. In the disability community, we call this inspiration porn, right? It's the posters you see in a doctor's office with the person with two prosthetic legs, and it says like "Dare to Dream," and that's what we want to avoid, thinking that disability is some kind of superpower. Now, don't get me wrong, I live my life loving and eat, sleep, and breathing disability, but it's not anything that is overcome or that gives you like extra brave points. It's just something, we all got our things, and it's just something. One thing too is that idea of overcoming disability. Now, sometimes you are temporarily disabled, right? Like you might get in an accident and have to use a wheelchair for a while. So you're temporarily disabled. But for most disabled folks, there's not a cure, right? So you never really overcome it. I like to think, oh, wow, like that person is like, not coexist, that's not the word. But your disability is part of you. It's not something that you want to brave through. It's just who you are. And then this last one, I know feels maybe a little icky or different, but a lot of folks in the disability space now are straying away from the idea of calling education or classes or people with intellectual or cognitive disabilities special needs. I have a handful of friends here in Birmingham, both at places like Exceptional Foundation and United Ability, that'll say, well, what about my needs are so special? Like, don't you have special needs? Like, don't you have special needs? And so it's just something to consider. I'm not saying that you're going to leave this training and just transform your language, but it's just thinking about, hey, how do my disabled friends talk about themselves at the end of the day? And let me latch onto that language, because ultimately we want to give them the power. But these are just some helpful swaps to think about when going through day-to-day life. That was a mouthful. So thank y'all for bearing with me. Okay, disability etiquette. Now, it's a bummer that like this idea of disability etiquette even has to be like a thing. And I wish there was a better way to say this, but we're going to go through it. This includes how, when I say PWD, person with disabilities, people with disabilities, it talks about how they're treated and how other people interact with them. Often we tend to treat people with disabilities, or I'm sure you have maybe seen people with disabilities treated like children, or like they can't make any choices on their own, right? Back to that medical model idea. Also, side note, sometimes folks treat people with disabilities like they have other disabilities. For example, the amount of blind and legally blind and low vision friends I have that have been talked to really slowly and really loudly when they ask for help, when they're like, ma'am, I'm not deaf and I have a 4.0, like get to the point. So little things like that, right? Oftentimes, and most times, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, the person with the disability is ready to speak up for themselves and make their own decisions. So this is gonna lead us into our next breakout, but and if possible, see if you can either, if you have your phone out, take a picture of this slide so you can reference it, because I'm going to put up 4 scenarios here. And I want your rooms, your breakout rooms, to go through each scenario and see what you would do and how you would respond. And we will talk about these afterwards. So think about who the spokesperson for your group is going to be. So Katie, if you wouldn't mind sending us back into those rooms, if that's possible. I'll see y'all in, let's say 8 minutes.
I just said I didn't want to join it. That's how I handled that.
Sorry, I don't know how to do it. Also,
No,
just a
that's-
heads up, it records everything we're saying right now, so it's been catching all the Bluey that my child has on.
Oh gosh. Well, when it asked me if I wanted to go into the breakout room, since I'm about to walk into the concert, I just said no.
Perfect.
So I'll put myself
Good.
back on mute and then
Okay,
I'll join
sounds
back
good.
in. Thanks.
You're welcome. Marilyn, you should have just gotten an invite to join a room. Yep, there you go. I just gave everybody else their 60-second warning.
Assuming she's going to give us the right answers to those scenarios.
I'm sure.
Oh, wow, y'all. I don't know about y'all, but we had some nuggets of gold in there, and I know we're not all back. But I want us to start thinking about a little bit that last question. We were just talking about disability in kids and you know, learning ableism pretty early. And I'll wait. Oh, I think the conversation was getting rich, but I think people are coming back. So as people trickle back in, I wanted to share about that last scenario or situation and how ableism, and we begin to internalize that ableism really early, right? As a legally blind kid, you know, who really couldn't see much detail at all, but just like shapes and general, you know, outlines of folks. If I was to stare at someone with a disability in a grocery store and be like, mom, what's that? And I bet y'all all, or not all of you, but I bet a lot of people in this room had the sweet Southern mama that was like, oh honey, we don't stare, baby. Like we don't look like, and tried to kind of shield you away. Or like, it's not nice to, you know, talk about someone with a disability. And so that teaches us to internalize that so early. My friend Allie Stroker in New York, she's a wheelchair user. And she says that, you know, sometimes when she's rolling down the street, people will like take a huge semicircle to get around her instead of just walking right next to her. And that kind of, I always think about how when we're young, we're kind of taught that. Oh my gosh, Kristen, you know Allie? She's so cool. She won a Tony. She's really fierce. I am so dead that you know Allie. I'm so happy. Okay. Also, yay for the first disabled actor winning a Tony. Also sad that it was 2 years ago. Okay. Talk to you later, Kristen. Just y'all, before we move on, did anyone have any sort of aha moments? This is one that I do want to pause and share. If a group wants to dive in a little bit more. Don't be shy.
In our group, Barbara was sharing that she was explaining it was someone, you know, Barbara, or a family member who is a little person who married a little person and now they have little people, children. And she was telling that story. And my immediate reaction, I went, oh, cute. They're a family of 4 people, human beings, normal people. And I immediately was picked, you know, and so catching myself and not dehumanizing people in that situation. So that was a moment for me. And I shared that with them. I was like, that was a really weird thing to say. So
wait, that's so awesome that you caught it though also. And I'm going to give a plug for this later, but I worked on a project with disabled artists, and Danny Woodburn, who's a disabled actor, he's a little person as well. And he talks about, you know, even the way that little people are portrayed in media, it makes our brains think that way, right? He jokes about, you know, he's been in, you know, 20 movies and he's been a gnome or an elf in about 18 of them, you know? And he's like, why can't I just be the pizza guy? So we'll talk about that more, but I'm glad that you had that aha, Catherine, because it's going to take some of those ahas to keep going. Anybody else?
Oh, on the one with where you say "see you later," I mean, is that are we extremely?
That was a trick
awkward?
question.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm
What's the
glad.
answer?
The answer is like it's an idiom we talked about in my group. Yep. Julie was saying, you know what? We say things all the time. We can't be, you know, I'm not trying for us to all leave here tonight and be like, man, like I gotta hang my head, like I'm really losing. No, do y'all know how many times I say good to see you and I can't see what you look like? Oh, yes. So of course that one was a trick question, but the other ones were not trick questions.
Allie B, I had a funny story about that one. When I
Yeah.
was working at Trinity, one of the dads in the whose kids were in our program. He was the pianist at the church, and he was legally blind. And I walked by him one day, and I was like, "Hey, Keith, good to see you." And he said, "Oh, I wish I could say the same." And he started laughing. And I can share this with y'all, I think. Let me look at all the adults here. And I said, "Oh man," and I dropped the F-bomb, and I said, "I really effed up." And and he was like, "Oh, you're good." But in that moment, I was like, "Oh man." And he normalized it for me in the moment, but also not his role. So that's
No.
for me.
Oh, I love that you have that. I mean, yes, Kristen, I have that moment a lot with my friends as well. And I'll be like, man, must be nice, but I'm really just being, a little turd. So that's so good. And yeah, just normalizing it and being like, oh, it happened. And like, yep, moving on. So yeah, anything else?
Also, the last one, I really want to
Yeah.
know the answer to this because I was sharing, I have a 4-year-old who does this a lot.
Yes.
My 4-year-old comments and has curiosity about everything and everyone. So I would like to know the answer.
Yes. Well, of course I'm going to be like that. Like, if you've ever gone and seen a counselor where they're like, it's both, or like, it's all the things. But what I'll tell you is this question has a lot of layers. So when we think about like, is that the first time maybe your kid has ever seen someone with a disability? And like, how could we bring that in earlier in like the books we read and the shows we watch and the stories we tell, right? So maybe that is a way to think about it even before that. So you're having the exposure. But then if it's in the moment, it really is, it's situational and proximity based, right? It can give you a time to be like, yeah, like this person has a disability. And like, who was it? Again, I'll share another story about my friend Allie. People will be like, "Mommy, look, she's in she is a wheelchair." But they're like, "Mom, why is that girl in a stroller?" To Allie, who's in a wheelchair. And she like will hear it and say like, "Hey, like, I'll talk to you about it." And then sometimes the parents get like shrivelly, they start shriveling. But let that person, if they do want to talk about it. Or if they say it when the person is in earshot, it's okay to be like, is it okay if my son or my daughter asks you? And they might say no. I joke, and I'll just give you a personal story. So if I'm reading print that is not large print, even every large print Bible is small print, by the way. But anyway, anything small, right? I read it like this. So like this is comfortable for me. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't, I think this is even upside down, so I can't even see it. But it is just how I read. But when I lived in New York, you'd be surprised the amount of people on the subway who would say, "Oh, honey, don't you need glasses?" Or "What's wrong? Why are you reading so close?" And really, I didn't mind the question. But depending on the mood I was in, you sure as heck would get a different answer. So some days I would be educator mode and say, "Hey, I have this eye disease and I have optic nerve, blah, blah, blah." And I would give them an analogy and like, tell them like, if my optic nerve was a big Twizzler, yours would just be one string of that Twizzler, or mine would be one string of the whatever. And then sometimes I would be like, "I'm legally blind," and then just go back to reading. And then some days I would say, because I really didn't want to deal with it, "Gosh, you are so right. I should get my eyes checked," because I was just not having it. So it's also up to the person with a disability how they want to answer. But you will never know, especially if you're in that close proximity. Like, it's okay to give your kid the freedom to ask the question. And it's not as intrusive as you probably think it is. Any other questions there, or shall we?
I got some to tell y'all. Hey, everyone.
Come on, Dedrick. What's up?
Not much, Allie.
I'm happy you're here tonight.
I'm grateful to be here.
Good. Well, thank you for tuning in.
It's great to be here, to be part of the group with disability.
Oh yeah, it's a pretty good club, if I say so myself.
This definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Well, anyone have a question, or do we want to just keep rolling? I think we're going to keep rolling. I'm getting it. Y'all got to speak up because I can't see your little sweet faces in the. Yes.
Speak, Larry.
No camera.
She can't see.
Larry, hey, I can't. I love the banter between Julie and Larry. Keep going, Larry. Hit it.
Okay, I'm gonna say that
You've been around us, you know.
the first one is always going to be a problem of helping someone with a door, because I'm going to help someone with a door, whether they're in a wheelchair or whatever. I mean, I'm going to hold the door. It's just.
You're just, yes.
Yankee, you do not know how many fights we've had over opening car doors and holding the door for me. So
It's a
that's just a
struggle.
good Southern boy.
I'm going to let y'all keep having that sweet, sweet conversation together. All right. I'm going to share my screen again. Give me a breath to do that. Lord. Okay, here we go. Here we go. It's about to get fun. We've already talked about these. So, of course, a lot of this comes down to assumptions. And of course, the old saying that Dad taught was to assume just makes an ass of you and me. So let's not. These are some things, and I'm going to list them all, that we, oh, I did it. Okay. That we all tend to want to assume about people with disabilities. Be careful not to assume. And also, wait, pause. Don't read these. I know you're going to want to. Don't read them yet. When you hear me say them, you're going to be like, well, dang it, Allie B. What the heck do we even do anyway? Don't worry. Just like take a breath. It's all good. You'll find your middle ground in these places. But be careful not to assume that a person with disabilities wants or requires assistance, or that a person does not want or require assistance, right? But let them be the one with agency that says, hey, could I have a little help here? Upon, if a person accepts your help, be careful not to assume that you know what's best for them. Prime example. I lived in some housing in New York with blind and low vision folks, right? It was just like a street of blind people. It was amazing and beautiful. And everyone just wanted to help everyone else across the street. Like it was just like good deeds day every day on this block. And some people would say, sure, you can help me across the street. But then they wouldn't wait for the person to tell them how. So they were just like dragging the person or giving them like the hoedown elbow, when like there is a right way to guide a blind person across the street, and you can like grip their elbow with a little C grip and you learn all the things. But they didn't give that person the space to be like, yeah, here's what I need. It was just like, I need help. I've got you. Mama knows what to do and I'm gonna do it. So listen to how they would like to be helped, or like how you could help them best. What I talked about, that example of how teachers, especially substitute teachers, assume that if you have one disability that you have 10. Be careful not to assume that, because that is a really common thing. Another assumption that that people with disabilities are just so unsatisfied with their quality of life. That's a really that's one that we don't think about, but then when we think about it, we're like, oh, I've definitely been there. I know that I have. That this is one that's tricky, but we often see people that don't appear to be disabled. And sometimes those people get accused of faking their disability. I have a lot of friends with learning disabilities, and a lot of folks who are in my world, in the low vision world, get accused of faking it all the time. And it is 2022, and that should not be the case. Actually, people with invisible disabilities way outnumber people with visible disabilities. Lastly, that people with disabilities will always be receptive to your questions, just like I talked about with Kristen's question, right? If someone comes up to me on the subway, some days I will give them like the medical breakdown of my disability, and some days I'll be like, you're right, I should try glasses. Thanks for the question. So just some assumption things to think about. Again, not right or wrong, just think about. All right, moving on with a cute dog picture. This is a dog birthday party because I like to spice up my slideshow at this point in the training. I want to talk about, when we talk about disability inclusion, that access does not equal inclusion. When I told y'all that the ADA was a starting line or like a springboard and not a finish line, this is what I'm talking about. A lot of places, museums, schools are required to be accessible. And a lot, so are museums. So like these places are accessible, so they think they've done the work, right? Oh, well, these are all the things we do. We're accessible. But I always say that access, inclusion, and belonging, I like to talk about them in terms of going to a party. So if your party is accessible, everyone can come. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I love a party. The doors are wide open, the music's bumping, there's food, the tables are at ADA appropriate heights. So, someone in a wheelchair can reach for the cake. Everything's great, right? Like it's accessible. But how many times have you gone to a party and found yourself alone by the punch bowl, just like pretending to text on your phone? Or maybe if you didn't have a phone, twirl your hair or something. That is what happens a lot of times when something is merely accessible. When something is inclusive, I like to say it is like being asked to dance at the party. When it's accessible, you were given an invite. When it's inclusive, you were pulled onto the dance floor, right? You felt like you had a place, that you could do everything that you wanted to do, right? This is inclusive. I can have some agency, some agency. But then if we think about belonging, the person with the disability would be on the party planning committee, right? Like that is where we go from inclusion to belonging. It's not just that they're in the space and having a blast, they're helping plan the dang thing. And that's what we want to think about, right? Is, okay, do we see people with disabilities in church, in school, in work, in the clubs and in different, extracurricular things that we do? Like, okay, so there are people with disabilities there. Well, first question is like, are they like really there? Like, can they even come to the table? Like, is it accessible? If so, like, are they being included in groups? Are they being asked to contribute? Are they contributing? Do they feel safe to contribute? And then that third layer is, well, dang, they're making the choices. Like that's fierce. That's awesome. So I just want y'all to really think about that. That always helps me because a lot of times we're like, yay, it's accessible and it's done. But alas, it is not. So I'm not going to go through this list of 40 million accommodations. A lot of these might look a little more theater specific because that's my main peeps. But accommodations are what people with disabilities use to work at the rate that they got to do to get the jobs done they need in life. A lot of times there's this negative connotation to like, oh, they need accommodations, or like, oh, this like extra burdensome thing that you need. And people with disabilities feel that a lot from non-disabled people. And so I like to reframe it instead of an accommodation. I'm like, what tools do you need to succeed? Because ultimately, like, you just want to feel like you have a chance, right? You are in the game. So I like to think about accommodations as success tools. And on this slide, if you do not have low vision, you can read all of the things here, but just some things to think about, right? First of all, accessible buildings, signage, large print materials, audio descriptions of things, like if you are streaming something, or if like museums, a lot of times if you want to know great audio description, go to the Birmingham Museum of Art and do a tour, or watch Netflix with your audio descriptions on. It has made a lot of shows way more funny because you forget all the visual stuff you miss. Captioning, having sensory friendly days or having sensory friendly kits, which First Church rocks with the fidgets. We love it. There's a lot of things too, like is there a service dog policy? Can everyone not just sit, but like sit in a place that's fair? Because a lot of times, if someone with a certain disability needs an accessible seat, well, the back row probably isn't awesome for them, but just a thought. Also things like if we're doing something virtual, Do you have a hard print copy, or do you have a copy you could send someone ahead of time? That's really helpful too. For example, like in classrooms, that's a big college accommodation for any of you. I know a lot of y'all are in the education world, but having copies of things that are up on the screen, super helpful, makes folks not feel left out. And that can help folks with a variety of disabilities, right? It can help folks stay organized and like see, and that's really grounding. It can help folks literally see. Just a couple things, but if this seems like a big overwhelming list, take a screenshot. I mean, I am happy to share these slides with y'all too. Just some ideas to think about in your lives and maybe where you work and the things that you do. My favorite acronym, of course, is PARTY. And these are 5 steps I take when I'm planning for inclusive programming and programming where people hopefully feel they belong. And I broke it down in these steps because it just helps when you have a good acronym. These steps are, we have to prepare, right? We can't wait till the night before and then realize, oh my gosh, these 5 people needs accommodations and we forgot. That's a big thing that will happen, is just a lack of preparation. And it's always, as y'all know, it's always better to be more prepared than less. Once we prepared and we know, right? A lot of times preparing is just knowing what accommodations you can actually provide. And guess what? You probably can't provide everything all the time because you're just figuring out, and you're figuring out who's in your circle and what people need. And that's okay. I work currently at Red Mountain Theater, and we're working a lot on our accessibility over there. And we have, large print programs and sensory bags and sensory friendly performances, and interpreters, but we don't have captioning yet. And that's okay. We're getting there. It's one step at a time. It's not do 44 things and then you'll hit perfection, right? It's one step at a time. So you figure out what accommodations you can make and you state those. Another example of that would be if you're ever in a work situation where you're making a form or a meeting invitation, to have a spot where you say, do you have any access needs? Super simple, but just that extra step can be a game changer. A lot of friends and I can share that we had a teacher in New York who had just the question of, is there anything else you need to succeed in class? We got this from our acting professor, and it was a game changer because it was the first time in my 5 years of living in the city that I had anyone ask, and that I felt like I could disclose, because I knew that if they were asking, they probably were ready to lean in. So something like that. And then reach out, right? If you are making accommodations, you want to make sure that you have folks. A lot of times when I've worked in arts organizations, I've heard, well, we had an ASL performance and nobody came. And awesome, but like, tell me about your outreach plan. So that's something that doesn't happen overnight. Train. Look what we're doing now. We're going through training. Yay. This is awesome. There's many more ways to train and a lot more to learn. And don't worry, I've got a resource slide for you. So get excited. But we train, we learn and we unlearn, and we learn some more and we learn some more. And then the old principle of yes and, that says when a person with a disability tells you what they need, yes. And is there anything else that I could help, facilitate your success? Or is there anything else that would be helpful for me to know? A lot of times we get like yes buts of like, yes, but the thing is, it's going to be tricky for us because bummer. That's basically like a no. So if you're going to yes and it, that means you're going to add, right? So maybe think yes plus. Oh, fun little slide dance there. All right. I think I actually want to skip this last breakout and have some time for us to just be together as a group and sort of share some thoughts, some takeaways, some questions. But before I do that, I have a resource slide for you. And this is a screenshotter. This is like a control whatever on your computer, or get your phone out. If you want to learn more, just some awesome books, things you can watch on Netflix and YouTube. and podcasts if that's your lane of learning. And these are all resources that I use daily. So if you ever want to nerd out on any of them, let me know. Awesome. I'm going to get out of our slides if y'all are good. And if you need this again, y'all know where to find me. So I am going to stop my screen share so I can see all of you. And it takes a minute for a half blind person to stop their screen share. So there we go. Okay, I think we're back to normal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, hallelujah. I still can't see y'all. Okay, now I can. Awesome. Well, that was a lot. And this is, again, we're just dipping our toe in. But I would love to hear from you and just see if you have any questions, any thoughts, or anything that was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to take that right now and implement it, or this is going to take me a minute. Just anything you want to share or feel called to share.
I think the clarification of the terminologies was really helpful. Like there's a lot of things that you clarified that if I was thinking about it, I may not have guessed the right thing or might not have even thought to look it up. So thank you.
Thank you. And I can send y'all, we can just, I love a resource folder, but we can have a First Church resource folder. Like I want to share all of this because it's helpful. And guess what? In 10 years, they might be like, oh, we don't say disability anymore. Like we say fabulosity. And that's the new term, right? Wouldn't that be nice? But I'm serious because again, like in the 90s, they said handy-capable. Okay. Like yikes. Yikes now, but probably pretty empowering to somebody in the 90s. Okay. So it will change, but like now it's like you got the cool 2022 version.
Hey, Allie, I just appreciate you doing this. I mean, my grandparents were members at our church, and the last probably 10 years of my grandfather's life, he was in a wheelchair. And I mean, they got to the point where they just couldn't come and participate. And I'm now, helping care for my own mother, and I brought her to Christmas Eve service, and I mean, she doesn't walk up steps very well, and the elevator in the church was locked at the time we got there. And, we did manage to get her up and in. But I mean, there are just a lot of things like that as I get older too, that I think about accessibility issues a lot more. And I should have been thinking about them all along. But anyway, I appreciate you opening our eyes to a lot of these things.
I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'm Dewana McCary. Anyway, I think one of the things that's really important is everybody at First Church, we are very sensitive to each other. And I always have to sit like on the third row on the left-hand side because my good ear that I can hear out of is my right ear. So it's like, okay, if you want me to see you, you need to be on my left side. But if you want me to hear you, I need to be on your right side. So it's kind of like a diagonal of seeing and hearing and understanding. And I really appreciate, we need to do something about the sound system at the church. And I know they're working on that, but for those of us who are challenged in our hearing, it's sometimes difficult. But Allie, I really appreciate your inclusive language and just being able to honor each other because God created all of us to be unique and different in the image of the Creator.
So good. And such a good point too is I think one thing that I know I talked to Stephanie about a little bit, but was even creating an accessibility survey just to see like where the needs are, because we'll start with, and we know some pretty immediate needs that we have in our church, but I think we're always learning. And why I'm so thrilled about this sermon series and just getting to dig in this month is, I'm learning things about members and I'm, only a year into being at First Church, but I'm learning so much from y'all. And I think sometimes when we talk about disability, it finally opens the door. It's like when I was in New York and I finally learned that I could act with other disabled people and do like disability forward theater. It changed the game for me. And it's like, oh, because I was finally like around that world and that language and that, and I was not afraid to ask. So it's so important that we keep talking about where the needs are too, and how we can work together on them.
I love the point about asking knowing that someday my kid will probably say something that I will feel cringy about, that it's okay to ask if they can ask questions and approach it that way from a curiosity. So instead of we don't say those things. So that was really helpful for me.
Yes. And y'all, I'm going to send Kristen to a list of children's books too that feature disability.
That would be wonderful.
Get them on the shelf. Yes.
Allie B, I was thinking, I appreciate you reminding us that, it's baby steps, that we can't do it all at once. And that when we take off those small bites to chew, it gets us closer and closer to where we, hope and dream we want to be. And likewise, the reminder that sometimes it's as simple as when we put a form out, leaving space to say, what are your accessibility needs? And that is so easy. Like, that is so easy. And yet I forget about it every time, so the reminders of just the little things that we can do that get us closer to where we want to be. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I know sometimes, like, I call them access hacks, but they're so small. Like, it's so interesting, but some of the smallest things that we do can make the biggest difference to someone. And I've had so many moments where I'm like tearing up. I'm like, just so grateful for this thing. And the person who did it was like, I literally made something different on a form. And I was like, but it changed a life, but I'm being dramatic. But it really does. It really does make a big impact.
Allie, something that really is very simple that has helped me is, instead of white paper, having off-white or a light cream color to see words.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so easy with forms or with programs or whatever. It's just not the glare white, but the light yellow color. I don't know, vanilla.
Oh yeah.
color.
I mean, most of the time when I'm reading something, it is black background with white writing, like there's just a lot of things that just different access needs that it's a pretty easy shift, but it just takes a little thought. Was anyone surprised by anything? Or was anyone like really like, oof, I'm not proud of this. Like, I want to go run in a hole, because if that was okay, like, that's okay. Oh shoot, is someone trying to say something? Also acknowledging that I was like, all right, y'all, so where do you feel the most vulnerable right now? And we're in a huge group room. So if you don't want to dig in, but I know that when I was first going through some of this, I had a lot of internal like pushback of like, oh, that doesn't feel good to me yet. And it's okay if some of this is feeling like I'm like that you're still working through it. But anybody else has anything they want to share? And if not, I'll let you go 5 minutes early.
I do.
Yes.
I wanted you to know, I grew up in a Baptist church as a child before I joined Methodist. At the age of, in my kindergarten year, with my church friends, Mom.
Oh no, keep going.
I started going to First Methodist in 2021, in about 2014, at 21 years old. And I first joined in, met a lot of people just like y'all. since January. And I've been there. I've been starting going there 8 years ago. I enjoyed it ever since.
Yeah, Dedrick, I feel that First Church is pretty inclusive and awesome place, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. It's been almost 10 years of being here.
I'm excited, y'all. Speaking,
I'm so sorry, guys. I can't be with y'all until next month.
Well, we'll miss you in the meantime, but we'll have some updates for sure by then.
Well, before we part ways, Allie B, I just wanted to say thank you so much from all of us. We appreciate you taking the time to help us learn. And Dedrick, hold on, let me wrap us up, okay? We really appreciate you taking the time to help us learn and help us think and unlearn and relearn. And we know we have a long way to go, but we appreciate all that you've done. And before we part ways officially, I'd love to kind of pray to close us out, if that sounds good. All right, will you pray with me? God, we give great thanks for this community of faith, for Allie B and the way that she is leading us to step out courageously and learn more about how to be truly an open place for all and include folks with disability. God, we pray that you would just help us to be kind and gracious with ourselves as we continue the process of learning and trying, and knowing that sometimes we'll get it wrong, but that for the times we do get it right, God, it really matters, and that it's bringing about your kingdom of God on a regular basis. We ask that you would be with us as we go from this place this night and help us as we put all of this into practice in our world. We give you great thanks. Amen. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you, Allie B.
Thank you.
Good night.